Hi, my name is Francesca Lupini, and today I'll be talking about the results of our paper entitled Variation in Caregiver-Reported Child Sleep Patterns and Problems by Family Socioeconomic Indicators. So this study had two main aims, the first one being to examine variation in sleep patterns, behaviors, and problems by two family-based socioeconomic indicators, one being income to needs ratio and the other being caregiver education level. The second aim was to examine variation in correlates of a caregiver-endorsed child sleep problem, both across and within these socioeconomic indicator groups. So in this study, we used two family-based socioeconomic indicators, one being income to needs ratio, which is calculated using a family's household income divided by the federal poverty threshold according to that family size. And the second one was caregiver education level, which was dichotomized into either high school education or less, or greater than a high school education. Caregivers completed the brief child sleep questionnaire to report on a child's sleep patterns, sleep behaviors, and sleep problems. So just jumping into our results here, for sleep patterns, we found significant differences by income to needs ratio for sleep onset latency, which is how long it takes to fall asleep, night awakening duration, and nighttime sleep duration, such that children living in poverty were experiencing the longest sleep onset latency, the longest nighttime awakening duration, and the shortest nighttime sleep duration. And we found no differences for any sleep patterns by caregiver education level. For sleep behaviors, the overall model for bedtime routine consistency was significant, but it didn't vary by income to needs ratio. And although caregivers with an education greater than high school were more likely to report a consistent bedtime routine, this result did not reach statistical significance in the logistic regression. The overall model for bedtime difficulties was not significant and did not vary by income to needs ratio or by caregiver education level. Now, taking a look at the results for our second aim of our study, which was to look at the correlates of sleep problem endorsement, we found that sleep problem endorsement did not differ by income to needs ratio, but it did differ by caregiver education level. So caregivers with an education greater than high school were 4 times as likely to endorse a child's sleep problem as caregivers who had a high school education or less. We also found that caregivers who reported more frequent night awakenings, longer night awakenings, and bedtime difficulties were also more likely to endorse a child's sleep problem. And because we found that caregivers with greater than a high school education were more likely to endorse a child's sleep problem, we looked within these education groups to see if there was any variation in the correlates within groups. So for caregivers with a high school education or less, the overall logistic regression model was significant, but there were no specific sleep patterns or behaviors that were uniquely associated with endorsing a sleep problem. On the other hand, for caregivers with greater than a high school education, the overall logistic regression model was significant, and we found that caregivers who reported a later bedtime, more frequent night awakenings, and bedtime difficulties were more likely to report a child's sleep problem. And of note, caregivers reporting bedtime difficulties were over 30 times as likely to endorse a child's sleep problem. So these findings suggest that sleep patterns may be more robustly linked to income to needs ratio, while perception of a child's sleep problem may be more linked to caregiver education. So thinking about these outcomes from a socio-ecological perspective, multiple levels of factors may be contributing to study findings. So for example, while we were looking at family level factors like income to needs, this may be reflective of neighborhood level factors like light, noise, overcrowding, and safety concerns that we know impact sleep patterns. Another factor that may play into this is caregiver expectations of normal versus problematic sleep, which may vary with caregiver education. So even though there were no differences in sleep patterns by caregiver education level, we did see that sleep problem endorsement varied by that socioeconomic indicator. So it could be that caregivers with higher levels of education have unrealistic expectations about what sleep looks like in early childhood, especially things like night awakenings. And lastly, although we didn't measure for sleep health literacy in this study, it's possible that caregivers are unaware of certain sleep patterns that may be indicative of a global sleep problem simply due to lack of sleep health knowledge. Our study's findings suggest that clinicians could adjust sleep assessment practices in clinic visits by asking more about specific sleep patterns like night awakenings and sleep onset latency rather than relying on a single question about overall sleep problems. Clinicians could also be probing more for caregiver expectations about sleep in order to set realistic expectations for what child sleep should look like for their developmental age. And lastly, understanding which sleep patterns are related to sleep problem endorsement can guide our preventative educational efforts within sleep health. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy reading our paper.